Last time we went into the war, Japan refused to write down 8 emperors with no recorded history, a country in collapse documented only by Chinese historians, 3 separate conflicts in the chronicles that may be fragments of the same storm, distributed across the timeline so they could no longer be seen as one, and at the end of that episode, 2 figures appeared. Momoso Hime, the woman some scholars identify with Himiko, and Emperor Sujin, the question I left open. Today we go into that question. The Nihon Shoki gives Emperor Sujin a title. It reads, in later pronunciation, Hatsukuni Shirasu Sumeramikoto, the emperor who first governed the country. Emperor Jimmu, the first emperor, also carries a title that points in the same direction, the ruler who first governed the realm under heaven. 2 emperors, 1 title, both described as the first. The chronicles do not explain this. They simply place both titles there and move on. That question, why 2 first emperors, is where this episode begins. From the 2nd emperor to the 9th, the 8 silent emperors, the chronicles record almost nothing. Names, consorts, the location of a palace, that's all. Sujin is different. His reign contains actual events, a plague, and how it was stopped. The dispatch of generals across the archipelago, the first census, the first systematic taxation. The chronicles record a reign that built something, and there is archaeological evidence to work with. The Kojiki records Sujin's death year notation as Tsuchinui Tora, a cyclical date that corresponds to either 258 or 318 AD. The burial mound associated with him, Andonyama Kofun in Tenri City, Nara Prefecture, measures roughly 242 meters from end to end. Archaeology places its construction in the early 4th century. The 2 figures don't align perfectly. The death year notation and the tomb's date don't point to the same year. Scholars continue to debate the range. What the evidence suggests, taken together, is that Sujin's reign connects to a transitional period somewhere between the late 3rd and early 4th century. That much seems stable. The precision does not. This already sets Sujin apart from the 8 emperors before him. He is among the first to leave a verifiable archaeological trace. But there's a piece of context worth placing here before we go further. In the last episode, we looked at Momoso Hime, the woman a number of scholars identify with Himiko. Hashihaka Kofun, where she is said to be buried, is dated to the 240s through 260s. Himiko's death, as estimated from Chinese sources, falls around 248 AD. After Himiko, Chinese records describe a male ruler who failed to hold the country together. Then a new queen, Toyo, took power at 13 and sent the last recorded mission to China in 266 AD. After that, silence. 147 years. Sujin's reign falls somewhere in or around that silence, if the 258 AD notation is closer to accurate. His reign may have overlapped with Toyo's. If 318 AD, he comes after the silence has already begun. Either way, he is not the reign immediately following Himiko. Toyo stands between them. That matters for how we read what Sujin did. Sujin's reign begins with a plague. The chronicles are direct about this. The people were dying. More than half the population, the Nihon Shoki says, fields were abandoned. The country was emptying out. The emperor performed rites. The plague continued. Then a god appeared in a dream. This pestilence is my will, the god said. Find a man named Omitataneko. Have him perform the rites. If you do, the curse will lift. The god's name was Omononushi, the great lord of things, the master of Mount Miwa. Sujin sent messengers across the provinces. They found the man in Setsu, far from the capital. He was brought before the emperor, asked who his ancestors were, and his answer was the god himself. Omitataneko was a descendant of Omononushi. The blood of the god ran in his veins. He was appointed to lead the worship at Mount Miwa. The chronicles say the plague ended Now, one fact worth noting before we go further. Omononushi is in several textual traditions identified with Okuninushi, the great lord of Izumo, the god of the land transfer we examined in episode 3. The Nihon Shoki variant records and the Kogo Shui treat them as the same divine figure. Not all sources agree on this, but the overlap is present in enough of them that it is worth holding in mind. The god whose will caused the plague may be the god whose land was taken. I'm not placing an answer there. The chronicles don't place one either, but the name is there. What I want to focus on instead is something the story makes clear that tends to get overlooked. Sujin did not perform the rites himself. He searched the country for a man who carried the right bloodline to perform them. A man whose ancestry gave him the authority to stand before that particular god on behalf of the living. This is not a story about the king pacifying a god through force or personal piety. It is a story about a king locating ritual authority, the right to perform the rites, and placing it within the structure of his state. Omitataneko didn't stop the plague. His bloodline did, and Sujin's act was to find that bloodline and give it a sanctioned position. If the four generals represent one axis of Sujin's state building, the military axis, then Omitataneko represents the other, the ritual axis, the absorption of sacred authority into the apparatus of the court. Sujin didn't conquer the gods. He found the people who could speak to them and brought them inside. In the 10th year of Sujin's reign, the chronicles record the dispatch of 4 generals to the 4 directions of the archipelago. Ohiko to the north toward Hokuriku, Takano no Kawake to the east toward the Tokai coast, Kibitsu Hiko to the west through the inland sea corridor, Tanba Michinushi to the northwest into Tanba. The stated purpose: to bring those who would not submit under the order of the court. There is an archaeological observation worth making here. The routes these 4 generals are said to have taken correspond closely to the areas where keyhole-shaped burial mounds spread during the 4th century. The Yamato-style tomb and the Yamato-style general appear to have moved in the same direction. Whether that is coincidence or pattern is a question the archaeology raises without quite answering. But before accepting this account at face value, the chronicles themselves present a problem. Kibitsu Hiko is described as a son of Emperor Kore, the 7th emperor. Sujin is the 10th. 3 reigns separate them. The Kojiki is honest about this. It places Kibitsu Hiko's activities in Kibi under Kore's reign, not Sujin's. The Nihon Shoki moves him forward and places him among Sujin's generals. A son of the 7th emperor serving as a general in the 10th emperor's reign is chronologically difficult. One possibility is that the Nihon Shoki compressed events from several reigns into Sujin's, using the 8 silent emperors as a gap that could be filled without contradiction, since there was nothing recorded there to contradict. The name 4 road generals, Shido Shogun, does not appear in the chronicles. It is a later designation applied to a story the chronicles themselves tell differently depending on which one you read. Then there is the Inariyama sword. In 1978, excavations at Inariyama Kofun in Saitama Prefecture recovered an iron sword with gold inlaid characters, 115 characters across both faces. Among them, a name, Ohiko. The inscription records that a man named Bokake was the 8th generation descendant of this Ohiko, and that his family had served the great king as sword bearers across those generations. The name Ohiko appears in the chronicles as Ohiko no Mikoto, one of Sujin's 4 generals. The overlap has led many scholars to connect them, but the sword does not call this Ohiko a son of Emperor Kogen, as the chronicles do. Whether the swords Ohiko and the chronicles Ohiko are the same person remains debated. What the sword does tell us is that in 5th century Eastern Japan, a powerful clan traced its legitimacy back to an ancestor named Ohiko, and that this lineage was connected to service under the Yamato court. The transmission of that name across 8 generations and hundreds of kilometers suggests that whatever Ohiko was real person, remembered ancestor, or both, his name carried authority in the relationship between the regions and the court. Taken together, what does this suggest? The Four Generals tradition is probably not a record of a single coordinated military campaign. It is more likely a compression, memories of integration across multiple reigns and regions gathered into Sujin's reign, because the 8 emperors before him left no record to push back. The chronicles made Sujin the emperor who first had achievements to record, which may mean they gave him achievements that weren't entirely his. Now I want to offer something that goes beyond the established record. This is my reading. You can disagree with it, but I think the evidence points somewhere specific. Let's go back to the title. 2 emperors carry what reads as the first to govern the country, Jimmu and Sujin. The chronicles give both of them this designation and never explain why. My reading is this. Jimmu was the origin point, the figure who established the founding claim, the divine descent, the right to hold the land. That is what the chronicles built around him. Sujin was the one who made it operational. After the disorder of the 2nd century, after Himiko, after Toyo, after the silence, Sujin appears as the figure who built the actual apparatus of a state. Not just the claim to rule, but the mechanisms. Generals sent outward, gods brought inside, census taken, taxes levied, and the method matters. On the military side, generals dispatched whose roots correspond to where Yamato-style tombs would later spread. On the ritual side, a man found whose bloodline gave him the authority to stand before the land's gods and bring their worship within the court's reach. 2 axes, the sword and the shrine. Both pointed in the same direction. If that reading holds, the 2 titles make sense without contradiction. One founding was mythological, one was operational. The chronicles preserved both because both were necessary. The claim of divine origin and the evidence that someone actually built something. One more thing, Sujin's reign falls at or near the entrance to what historians call the blank century. Toyo sent her last mission to China in 266 AD. After that, Japan disappears from the record for 147 years. The 258 AD notation would place Sujin overlapping with Toyo's final years. The 318 AD notation would place him after the silence has already begun. Either way, the structures he built, the generals' roots, the ritual appointments, the census, and the taxation would have been what the court carried forward through those 147 years. The blank century isn't just a gap. It may be the time in which what Sujin started quietly became permanent. If Jimmu established the origin point, Sujin may have been the one who made it run. Let me bring this back together. Sujin's reign is the first in the chronicles to contain a record of actual governance. A plague responded to. A god's worship incorporated into the apparatus of the state. Generals dispatched in directions where Yamato influence would later spread. A census, a system of taxation, the shape of something that works, but the chronicles are not consistent about the details. One of his 4 generals was probably active 3 reigns earlier. The Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki disagree on who went where. The term 4 road generals doesn't exist in either text. Here too, the contradictions left by the chronicles may be traces of what they compressed, and his reign sits at a hinge point in the timeline. The era of the shaman queens, Himiko, then Toyo, ends with Toyo's last recorded mission to China in 266 AD. What follows is silence. 147 years in which Japan does not appear in any external record. Sujin stands somewhere near that transition, between the queens and the silence, between the ritual kingship that preceded him and the military expansion that followed. Next time, who was Toyo? The woman who held Japan together after Himiko died? Who sent the last mission to China? and what happened when her time ended and the record went dark. The Queen's era ended with a final message to China. Then Japan went quiet for 147 years.